Welcome to Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. A world where coming in second place is not an option, but where principle-centered winning is the only approach.
Good morning and welcome to Government Contracting Weekly. I'm Jim McCarthy, the owner of Key Solutions and the host of this show. Now, maybe there has been a hotter subject than cybersecurity over the past few years, maybe. But if there is, I'm not sure what it would be. So this morning, we have brought together a distinguished panel to help us better understand just how real the cyber threat is, as well as the role of the federal government in cybersecurity and potential regulation of cybersecurity, and of course, what it means to you, the contracting community. Joining me today to discuss these and other issues are Michael Papay, the Chief Information Security Officer for Northrop Grumman. Good morning, Michael.
Morning, Jim.
Good morning. And two partners from the law firm of Crowell Moring, David Bodenheimer. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Jim.
Sir. And Evan Wolff, the Managing Director of the Chertoff Group. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Glad you're here. Okay. We got a very hot topic, so let's get right to it. So the first question I want to pose, I'd like to pose to Mike, and that is, okay, so there is a cybersecurity threat. How grave is that threat?
Well, I tell you, Jim, we see this a lot, and we hear this question out in the general public. I think there's a way of describing it that kind of gets at the real point of it, and that's adversaries in cyberspace are trying to do two things. They're trying to steal our intellectual property, and they're trying to disrupt the way we do business. And having been in the business at Northrop Grumman for quite a long time, Northrop Grumman's been doing cybersecurity for almost 30 years, and we've seen it all, and it's very pervasive, it's very real. And
is it getting worse or better?
It's absolutely getting worse.
Worse, okay. Well, that's not good news then for the nation and the contracting community. But here's a question for you, David. Some people still think that cybersecurity is a function of the IT department. I'm going to ask you, what role and why should the CEOs and senior public officials be concerned about cyber?
There's a couple of reasons. One, the risk management decisions have to be made at the top. Each government agency and each company needs to decide the level of acceptable risk and what they have to do to take care of that. The second is that there is an increasing focus at the top on senior management and their risk if they don't address the cybersecurity risk within their own organization. So, from a Securities and Exchange Commission standpoint, a congressional oversight standpoint, or litigation standpoint, top officials have to be focused on the cyber threat within their organization.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's very good. Evan, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, picking up on what David said, you really are seeing what I call a differentiation in how companies and how industry and how the government is really dealing with the cyber threat. First of all, we're seeing a stronger technology focus. We're seeing companies bringing new technology to bear, thinking about things in a different way, but also at the executive level, we're seeing executives really buy in and understand that the risk is something that affects the boards and affects industry as well. And so they need to understand what's in their rack, what their CISO is doing, and there needs to be dialogue across the company. And through that dialogue, we have a better understanding of what compliance is and what the risk is. And from that, to pick up on what Mike said, we really can understand what are the real threats and what do those threats mean to the company and how can they impact the company, and then you can compare to other threats.
There's some really small businesses, I guess, who are probably saying to themselves, why should I care about that? I mean, who's going to bother to take the time to hack my particular database or whatever? What would be your response to that?
So the small business challenge is real, and really what small businesses need to think about isn't what they do, but who their contracts are with. They're a part of a supply chain, and also who are their vendors who are providing the security services for them. Clearly not everyone will have the resources that large companies have, but small businesses play an important role, and they can do things more efficiently, and this is where the government really is stepping up their game and trying to help small businesses out, and they should.
Okay, David, from being from a major law firm, what is the legal community's involvement in cybersecurity?
There's a couple of roles. One role, the American Bar Association made cybersecurity one of its top priorities in the past year, recognizing that for organizations and for law firms, it's absolutely critical. The other role is that when there is a security breach, it is absolutely key to have the lawyers brought in to assist with the response to it, because there are a large number of litigations that often result after the breach occurs. And if you don't have the lawyers involved guiding that and working with the regulators, working with the lawyers who are on the other side, it is a huge risk, not only to corporations, but for government as well.
So talking about corporations, I mean, there's a legal perspective. Obviously, you come from a very well-established, prestigious, large integrator, and what is the role of a company such as yours in fighting cyber crimes or protecting our assets?
I tell you, in my company, there's an inside role that I play, which is the Chief Information Security Officer, and also an outside role, talking to our key customers about cyber and talking to legislators and talking to our partners. And inside the company, it's all about a team game. You got to involve the CIO, you got to involve the legal team, you got to involve the human resources, because there's privacy issues associated with cybersecurity, there's technology issues. It's that balance between how much protection do you want and how much can you afford to slow down the mission that the CIO is trying to accomplish about making sure that everybody has access to the data they need. So it's that real balance on the inside. When you talk about going out to the outside and helping customers out, you take that balance and what you've learned about protecting a large enterprise organization like inside my company, and you can make that available to your customers.
Okay, well, great. Well, we're going to step away for just a second, and when we come back, I'd like to kind of pursue with you gentlemen the whole question on regulatory activity, FISMA, and other topics. So we'll step away now.
I'm Kevin Madden, the Vice President and General Manager of Honeywell's Federal Systems Group, with another government success story. In 2002, Honeywell started working with the GSA to reduce costs and provide a reliable source of energy at White Oak, the FDA's new headquarters. Today, White Oak can separate from the local electricity grid and sustain operations when there are outages, which they've done more than 70 times over the last 3 years. To make sure the FDA has the power to protect this critical research, even during Hurricane Sandy. Honeywell has helped more than 150 agencies improve core infrastructure, facilities, deploy renewable resources, and trim emissions, often accomplished through guaranteed savings. Your mission is to make the country a better, safer place. Our mission is to help you meet your energy goals and mandates. For more information, visit buildingsolutions.honeywell.com.
So did we win that government contract?
We did. And now we've got to deal with the regulatory hurdles.
Well, good luck with that.
When the government's your client, you need to play by their rules.
And the rules change more than you think.
Exactly. We need someone who's done this before. Plus, it's complicated, so we're going with BDO.
BDO?
People who know government contracting know BDO. AFCEA has been bringing government and industry together since 1946. By joining AFCEA, you will reach the decision makers and become part of the discussion. You'll increase market visibility, gain market insight, receive discounts on AFCEA member services and events, and manage and engage corporate associates. AFCEA is the association of choice. Join today at www.afcea.org.
Welcome back. David Bodenheimer, question for you regarding the cybersecurity marketplace.
Right.
What is the federal government's role in that marketplace? How big? What does it do?
When you look at the federal government, the Office of Management and Budget has often said that the federal government is the largest user, consumer, and operator of data in the world. and you look at the types of secrets they have, it's some of the most incredible secrets in the world: national security information, Medicare data, taxpayer data. So protecting that information, the crown jewels of taxpayers and companies and others, is absolutely critical.
Okay. Well, I can see a clear link between why the federal government might want to be involved in protecting defense securities or taxpayer records. But what is the federal government's role in protecting the private sector, and why doesn't the private sector sort of, protect itself?
Yeah, so really the government does have two roles, as David said. The government buys infrastructure, buys IT services, and has to and puts the security into the regulations that it does when it's purchasing. But also, the government has a role in working with our critical infrastructure owners and operators. Sometimes that role is a regulatory role where they actually can direct and provide actual recommendations to industry on what they should do. Sometimes they're developing best practices and helping industry do that, and sometimes they're just providing supportive services, like helping an industry form an organization that can work together so they can understand the common threats that they face as a sector and increase the sharing of information. And it's that sharing of information that the government probably has a leading role, and that is best, they can play a best role in helping protect our nation's critical infrastructure.
Okay. Mike, your thoughts?
So I had a great analogy the other day by the White House cybersecurity coordinator, and he said protecting the nation against cyber threats is like protecting the nation from physical threats where every single person in the country lives on the border. And I think what happened really is that the government and the aerospace and defense industry have been dealing with the cyber threat for a long time, and so that's really where the expertise lies in terms of putting together the technology and the plans and the integration skills necessary. Now it's time to roll that out to the private sector and help them.
Okay, so what do you think the future in cybersecurity is for government contractors? We've talked about how the threat is probably becoming more and more severe, but where are the government contractors looking to participate at this point?
So I think if I spoke for Northrop Grumman, we're a technology leader and we're a leading provider of cybersecurity for the federal government, and we're taking advantage of that to really go global, and because cyber is a global threat, really. It's not just limited to here in this country. And taking advantage of that expertise is really where we see some of the next opportunities.
David, why is cybersecurity a good business to be in nowadays?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, that's where the money is flowing. So even when there's a budget crunch, there are increases in cybersecurity money, both in the government sector and also in the private sector. And that's being driven not only by the risk, but also by the sheer number of regulations that we're seeing. So as a result, it's a great market. But also, if you want to continue to survive in the government marketplace, you better have good cybersecurity, because the government's not going to do business with you, and the big contractors are not.
Yeah, we've heard it being discussed that a company's cybersecurity plan might actually become a weighted evaluation factor in source selection. Do you think that's a likely prospect, and why?
I think it's going to be cybersecurity plans and other documents that establish the credentials for the services and security a company face are going to be looked at like anything else in the FAR going forward. So absolutely, this is going to be a core, essential element in how a company, how competitive they are, and also how successful they can be in the federal market.
Okay. Well, if I can stay with you, Evan, on a question. I want to talk about the legislative activity that has surrounded cybersecurity on Capitol Hill. Would you characterize that as essentially a juggernaut or a vacuum?
I think what we've seen is, we had a lot of regulatory, a lot of legislative activity for a long period of time, and then the executive order came out about a year ago and created what I call a regulatory cliff, because it's given both the administration and through the actions of the departments and agencies a set of activities that they can do to see really what does the legislation need to look like, what can they do based on the current authorities, and we've seen the start both by looking at the current federal acquisition regulations, but also in the development of other activities such as identifying critical infrastructure.
Well, you're talking about a lot of regulatory activity, but I take it that's not matched by the same fervor on the Hill. Is that correct?
Well, the Hill is focused on both how do we create liability for a company, how do we create real standards by some people on the Hill, but also what's the role the government can play. And that's what the executive order that the president signed really focused on that last piece.
Okay, Mike, as the Chief Information Security Officer for your firm, do you feel like, are you caught up every day in red tape and bureaucracy in terms of regulations, or are you relatively free to do what you need to do for your company?
I think we've got a set of policies and procedures and practices that we follow. All my people are aware of those. Everybody's working hard to make sure that we're meeting those. But it's not really about compliance. It's about that risk management factor and how you really take an entire look at what the business of the company is and how you support the business of that by protecting the information we've got. Now, I think that the NIST cybersecurity framework is really a good example of a way that we can kind of coalesce all those policies and practices together and use that as a great starting point for opening up the conversation with the senior executives in the company and with other people out in the public who want to know, what's this cybersecurity all about?
Okay, well, we're gonna step away for another break, but when we come back, I'd like to follow that string and pursue that a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about NIST and some regulatory activity. So we'll step away right now and we'll be right back.
In this hyper-competitive marketplace, as a federal government contractor, now more than ever, you need to identify, track, forecast, and analyze opportunities that will help you grow your company by better positioning yourself to win contracts. I'm Jamie Bratton, the founder of Easy GovOps, and that's our mission. Utilizing the most intuitive market intelligence platform, Easy GovOps, enables contractors of all sizes to manage their pipeline, collaborate, and team like never before. Experience for yourself the power available to you and your team with a 5-day free trial period with no commitment necessary to begin. Simply visit easygovops.com to start your free trial today. Join the hundreds of other federal government contractors who are enjoying the ultimate competitive advantage of our unequaled market intelligence. Just spend one free week at easygovops.com and see for yourself.
Questions. Do you lack win strategy themes and discriminators? Are you being outmaneuvered by your competition? Did you get a late start on your proposal? If you answered yes to one or more of these nightmare scenarios, we can help. Hi, I'm Jim McCarthy, owner of Key Solutions. We help government contractors win government contracts. And for over 30 years, KSI has helped clients win or retain over $130 billion in government contracts by providing the keys to winning. We assist companies both large and small to enter the U.S. government contracts market or to increase their market shares. We have worked with 87 of the top 100 government contractors and literally hundreds of small businesses. So if you're chasing a must-win contract opportunity, go to our website, aockeysolutions.com, and click on Win. It's a tough market out there. Don't go it alone. Welcome back. We're talking about the subject of cybersecurity, and Evan, I would like to ask you a question about the legislative activity on the Hill. How would you characterize that nowadays, and how does that impact contractors from a regulatory standpoint?
Well, I would characterize it as we're really seeing a period of regulatory deterrence as companies are really focusing on the executive order. The cybersecurity framework that Mike just talked about has given an opportunity not only for defense companies that have very sophisticated approaches to thinking about cybersecurity to implement their voluntary programs, but it also allows other industries that haven't focused on cybersecurity, our nation's critical infrastructure, energy companies, manufacturing companies, retail companies that haven't spent as much time and haven't faced the same threat that the defense sector has faced, and gives them the opportunity to voluntarily look at that, begin that dialogue within different layers of the company. And it's that voluntary discussion that's happening that's really important right now, and that's what we're seeing happening within companies, and that's why I don't think we're seeing a lot of legislative activity. There's much that's needed. We do need legislation to pick up on the liability.
But the absence of legislative activity is more than compensated by the regulators. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's focused on this right now.
Okay, so David, talk to us about, shall we say, consistency or uniformity. It appears to me that the various agencies are handling all this in a different way. Your thoughts, please.
That's absolutely true. In the absence of legislation, one of the things that we've seen is each individual agency goes off to regulate its own cybersecurity requirements, not only through actual regulations, but also internal policies they impose upon contractors and contract clauses. The result is essentially a Tower of Babel in which contractors are facing a kaleidoscope of different requirements. They have one security regime, or that would be the least burdensome way, but instead they have to deal with a variety of
So David, I think that's actually getting a little better, though. From my perspective, what I'm starting to see in some of the contractual language that's coming down is, at least in the Office of Secretary of Defense, it's starting to come together. They're starting to get their heads around how to flow policy down through the acquisition process, so that what I'm seeing is a better set of requirements coming through the contracting language that says, build me a secure system.
And that's good for DOD, but for all of the other agencies, HHS, GSA, and the others, we're still looking at this kaleidoscope of different requirements that, we do need the harmonization to help us out of the executive order.
And also we have to look at the other side of this issue where it's not government buying IT equipment, but government telling companies what they should do either on a regulatory or non-regulatory basis. And that's really where, our nation's critical infrastructure is really challenged by what the government's doing right now.
At the very outset of this show, we said that cyber was no longer just the concerns of the IT department. So whose job is it to solve this Tower of Babel that you referred to?
I think it has to start at the top, because ultimately, at the top of the organization with the Secretary of Defense, at the top of the corporation, at the CEO level, because when there is a major breach, it is a catastrophic event for an agency, just as it was for the VA with the 26 million veterans and the lost laptop. For companies, some have lost $1 billion in technology through cyber espionage. When that happens, the impact on stock, the impact upon their ability to innovate in the future, all is at stake.
I view it a little differently, just in that I think it's a shared responsibility between government and industry, because government plays a very important role here, but so does the private sector. And I think it's really the interplay and working together and removing the barriers that allow companies to work together is where we really need to go.
Okay, well, we have about 30 seconds left, and I was wondering if I could get your thoughts, Mike, on how well the acquisition policy is meshing with, shall we say, the regulations on cybersecurity.
So I think there are a couple of different things that you got to look at. I think on the acquisition side, we need a clean set of requirements that allow us to build secure systems to what the government needs. So every unmanned vehicle that we build, every satellite that we build, should have a good set of clear requirements that tie back to the acquisition policy about cybersecurity.
Okay.
Now on the regulation side, that means I got to protect my internal information while I'm doing that part of the job.
Got it. Well, we're going to step away one more time, and when we come back, we're going to ask you all to give us your one takeaway for the audience. So we'll be right back.
Working in contract management is a complex job. Creating, executing, managing contracts. It's an ever-changing world, and our members share the same challenges. At the National Contract Management Association, we know this business, gathering the best minds in our field, furthering your career by providing knowledge and training. Together, we've figured it out.
Since 1941, the USO has been lifting the spirits of America's troops and their families. Members of our military continue to make sacrifices and defend our nation. That's why the USO of Metropolitan Washington, Baltimore is committed to serving them throughout their years of service. USO Metro is the way for you to say thanks to our local military members, their families, and our wounded warriors and caregivers. Please visit us at usometro.org.
As you've seen from watching our show, we've begun to produce and air commercials. And the response from prospective advertisers has been very strong for a couple of really smart reasons. First off, advertising in Government Contracting Weekly has virtually no waste. Our audience is made up almost exclusively of contracting executives and procurement officers. If that's your target market, we've got you covered. Secondly, we include commercial production within the reasonable cost of an advertising schedule. And even better, in producing your commercial, we utilize the 30-plus years of experience of Key Solutions. who've helped their clients win over $130 billion in contracts, in part by scoping out and refining the most impactful message. If you'd like to learn more, contact us at governmentcontractingweekly.com and click on Advertise.
Well, welcome back. We'd like to get sort of the last word from each of you. Let's start with you. Your one takeaway for the audience.
Thanks, Jim. I think it's all about training and awareness about cybersecurity, educating everyone from the board of directors all the way down to those kids who are in high school still that want to know that there's a career in cybersecurity. GCW should help.
Okay, well, we're trying to, that's for sure. David, what's yours?
I also pick up on the training topic. We need training on cybersecurity among the acquisition professionals as well. That's how they're going to implement it. That will solve some of the unevenness we now see in enforcement in the cybersecurity arena.
Okay. Evan, give me one right between the eyes here.
I think we need to give the tools to the people that defend the networks like Mike, better information to protect their networks, take away the liability that they have, and really focus on information sharing. Because if we create sectors that can come together and share common threats, we can actually do a better job of protecting them.
Well, thank you. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this morning's discussion as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. There is a tremendous amount of debate and even uncertainty surrounding cybersecurity issues, but there is one certainty, and that is that this subject will only grow in importance over the coming years. I want to thank our guests. First, Michael Papay, the Chief Information Security Officer for Northrop Grumman. Thank you, Michael, for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim.
And also David Bodenheimer, a partner with the law firm of Crowell Moring. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jim.
Glad you're here. And then also, last but not least, Evan Wolff, a partner at Crowell Moring and a managing director of the Chertoff Group. So thank you for being here, Evan.
Thank you very much.
Okay. But mostly, I want to thank you, our viewers, for once again making Government Contracting Weekly a regular part of your learning regimen. Now, on behalf of all my colleagues at Key Solutions, I'm Jim McCarthy, and I'll see you next week.
You've been watching Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored each week by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. For additional information, comments, questions, or suggestions, please write us at governmentcontractingweekly.com.